Here's something almost nobody tells you about getting rich. The moment you actually become a millionaire, your life barely changes. No champagne, no new car in the driveway, no private jet, no early retirement, no sudden urge to post motivational quotes about escaping the matrix. You wake up the next morning and everything looks exactly the same as it did the day before. And that's the part that, kind of messes with people's heads because they spent their whole lives believing the opposite. I'm Finn, and I want to show you something most investors completely misunderstand about that first $1 million. Because the real shift isn't the number. It's quieter than that, more boring than that, and honestly, far more powerful than that. When someone crosses $1 million invested, their stress drops, their dependence on a paycheck drops, and their financial mistakes just stop being dangerous. And their money starts doing something they've never felt before in their life. It starts building real wealth without needing them to show up. That's the moment money stops feeling like something you chase and starts feeling like a machine that keeps moving on its own. And that shift, it's worth more than the million itself. Think about how most people spend their entire adult lives. The whole focus is income. Like, how do I make more? How do I get promoted? How do I pull in an extra 20,000? What side hustle can I start? And look, income matters. Early on, it matters more than anything. When you've got nothing invested, your income is the entire engine. Your savings rate matters, your discipline matters, every sacrifice matters. But if you do this right, you eventually hit a point where your portfolio quietly takes over as the engine instead. And that's where things get kind of strange. Imagine investing consistently for years, skipping the upgrades, ignoring the lifestyle creep, staying patient while everyone around you spends every dollar they earn. Then one year, your portfolio grows by $80,000, $100,000, sometimes $150,000 on its own. And it hits you. Wait, that amount used to take you an entire year of work, and your portfolio just did it without you. That realization changes people permanently, because suddenly you start questioning everything. Why am I begging for a tiny raise? Why am I losing sleep over office politics? Why am I trading my health for income I might not even need later? This is exactly why two people earning the same salary can end up living completely different lives. One person pulls in $300,000 a year and spends all of it. The luxury apartment, the car payments, the expensive habits, the lifestyle that grows every single time the income does, lose the job, and it's instant panic. Meanwhile, someone earning far less quietly built $1 million portfolio, and their life feels dramatically more stable. They built assets instead of appearances. And here's the part most people miss entirely. The hardest part of building wealth isn't reaching the first million. It's surviving long enough, emotionally, to get there. Because the early years feel painfully slow. Your first 10,000 feels hard, your first 50,000 feels slow, your first 100,000 feels frustrating. Even a few 100,000 can feel underwhelming, because the growth still looks tiny next to the effort you're pouring in. You're doing everything right, and it still feels like nothing is moving. That's exactly where most people quit. They stop investing, they get distracted, they panic during a crash, they chase the trend of the month, they gamble on some crypto shortcut, they buy things to feel successful, and they reset their own progress right back to zero. But the ones who keep going long enough, they eventually reach a completely different stage. A stage where compounding becomes visible, where patience starts paying out rewards that feel almost unfair, where your portfolio starts carrying more of the load than you do. That's why the first million feels so powerful. Not because $1 million makes you rich forever, but because it usually means the machine is finally built. And once the machine exists, everything accelerates. The second million tends to come faster, the stress gets lower, and the options get bigger. So let me show you exactly why $1 million feels automatic, why most people misread this milestone completely, why some millionaires are secretly still broke, and what you should actually be focused on right now if you want to get there faster than most people ever will. To understand why a million feels automatic, you first have to understand why the first stretch feels so brutally slow. Because this is where almost everyone gets discouraged and just walks away. Let's be honest, the beginning of wealth building feels deeply unfair. You save your first $1,000 and feel proud, right up until you realize it barely changes anything. Then you hit 10,000 and that one actually feels better. You got a little breathing room. The car breaks down and it doesn't destroy you. An unexpected medical bill shows up and you survive it. A sudden expense lands and you just handle it. That's the freedom a cushion buys you. It cuts your desperation, it hands you options, but it still isn't real wealth. Then a lot of people reach 100,000, and this is where it gets emotionally confusing because 100,000 sounds enormous. For most people, it takes years to get there. But once they arrive, life looks almost identical. They still go to work, they still pay the same bills, they still can't actually stop working. They expected fireworks, and instead they got slow, quiet compounding. And a lot of them get frustrated and quit right at the doorstep. Then comes 300,000, and this is where the growth finally starts becoming visible. Now, a normal market year can throw off gains you can actually feel. You start seeing months where your investments move more than your paycheck did. And that feels genuinely strange the first few times. Then 500,000, and this is where it starts feeling almost unfair. Because now ordinary market returns can produce numbers that used to take you years of work to earn. This is the exact thing people outside investing misread. They see wealthy people getting wealthier and they assume it's luck. And sometimes, sure it is. But far more often, it's simply scale. And scale changes everything. Then you reach 1 million and the math gets kind of ridiculous. Let's keep it simple. If your portfolio grows at 8% in a year, so 1 million times 0.08 is $80,000. 80,000. No time, no asking for a raise, no second side hustle, no toxic boss, no weekends at the office. And in a strong year, that number can be a lot higher. Sure, some years markets fall and the number goes negative, that's completely normal. But over the long run, this is the point where you realize your portfolio has quietly become a second worker. And eventually that worker becomes more productive than you are. That realization rewires how people behave. They stop obsessing over tiny savings hacks. They stop chasing status purchases. They stop trying to impress anyone. Because protecting the machine suddenly matters far more than looking the part. It's also why people at this stage start guarding their time so aggressively. Because if your portfolio can generate tens of thousands a year on its own, then your free time, your health, your family, your peace, all of it becomes incredibly valuable. And this is exactly where so many people accidentally blow it. Right before the best part, they finally start making serious money and immediately upgrade everything. The bigger house, the luxury cars, the mortgage they can barely carry, the private schools that don't quite fit the budget. Lifestyle inflation quietly strangles compounding, and the trap is brutal because it feels so justified. I worked hard, I deserve this. I make good money now, and then somehow, they're earning 6 figures and saving almost nothing. They look rich, but the machine never actually gets built. That's why so many high earners stay trapped for decades, while someone earning far less but investing consistently hits escape velocity first. Not because they're smarter, not because they got lucky, but because they understood one thing. Wealth is built by owning productive assets long enough for the math to turn absurd, and most people quit right before that moment arrives. That's the real reason the first million feels automatic. Not because it was easy, but because the hard manual phase finally starts fading. And once that happens, the next stage gets even more powerful. Because most people think hitting 1 million feels like crossing a finish line. In reality, it feels more like stepping into a completely different world. Not because you can suddenly buy everything, but because your relationship with work starts changing in a way most people never get to experience. Before you've got meaningful wealth, your job feels mandatory. You need the paycheck. You need the health insurance. You need the bonus. You need the employer. And because you need all of it, you tolerate things you normally never would. The bad boss, the long commute, the office politics, the unreasonable schedule, the toxic environment, the missed family dinners, the constant low hum of stress. Millions of people stay stuck there for decades, not because they love the job, but because they don't have enough financial flexibility to leave. That's why people stay somewhere they hate for 20 years. They can't afford the uncertainty, and uncertainty feels terrifying when your entire life hangs on one paycheck. But once you've built $1 million portfolio, that pressure starts melting away. You might still work, but now it feels different. Now work becomes optional enough that you negotiate from strength. You can turn down a terrible offer. You can walk away from a toxic environment. You can take a real career risk, ask for more flexibility, put your health first, spend more time with your family, and stop making every decision out of fear. And that changes everything, because fear is what makes decisions expensive. Fear keeps people stuck. Fear makes them panic sell at the bottom. Fear makes them overwork themselves into the ground and trade away decades of their lives for money they may never actually need. And once that fear starts disappearing, people suddenly see how much of their life was quietly being run by financial pressure, then your time becomes dramatically more valuable, and this is where people start asking completely different questions. Instead of how do I make more money, it becomes why am I doing things I hate? Why am I wasting hours on things I could hand off? Why am I sacrificing time I can never get back? That's why people at this level start buying convenience instead of luxury. They outsource the tasks. They simplify their lives. They protect their time. Because once your assets get big enough, time becomes the most valuable thing you own. And that's almost impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't reached it yet. Their investing behavior flips too. When you've got very little invested, a market crash feels like the end of the world. Every dip feels like disaster, but seasoned investors, they often do the opposite. They keep buying, sometimes aggressively, because they know downturns are temporary and strong assets recover. And that single difference creates an even bigger gap over time. The average investor panics. The wealth builder stays patient, and patience gets rewarded again and again. Then something stranger happens. Your confidence gets quieter. You stop trying to impress people. The luxury brands feel less important, the flashy car feels less impressive, the status games feel less interesting, and you start noticing how many people are financing lifestyles they can barely hold together. That whole illusion becomes obvious once you understand what real wealth actually looks like, because real wealth is mostly invisible. It looks like flexibility, it looks like low stress, it looks like optionality, it looks like owning your own time. That's why people cross 1 million and feel almost shocked. Because they were expecting luxury, and what they actually got was control. And control turns out to be worth far more than luxury. Once you've lived without constant financial pressure, almost nobody ever wants to go back. And that's when the final shift happens, the one that makes the second million dramatically easier than the first. Because once you reach 1 million, the game stops being about building wealth and starts being about not interrupting it. Sounds simple, but it's where a lot of people make their biggest mistakes. After years of grinding and saving and sacrificing, people finally hit 7 figures and they think, I made it. And that mindset can be dangerous because $1 million is powerful, but it is not unlimited. And people who misunderstand that can wipe out years of progress fast. It usually happens in 3 ways. The first is lifestyle explosion. Someone hits 7 figures and upgrades everything at once. The massive house, the luxury cars, the private schools, the expensive vacations, the bigger social circle with bigger spending habits. Now their lifestyle is growing faster than their assets, and that's a silent trap, because high fixed expenses can make even a wealthy person feel trapped all over again. And it happens constantly. Someone hits 1 million but builds a life that needs 400,000 a year to run. Still stressed, still dependent, still trapped, just with nicer furniture. That's not wealth. That's expensive pressure. The second mistake is overconfidence, and this one destroys people. They build their wealth through patience, then suddenly they turn aggressive. They decide they're financial geniuses, and they start day trading, speculating, chasing crypto hype, leveraging real estate too hard, funding bad business deals, trying to get rich faster when they were already winning. And one bad decision erases years of discipline. People spend 15 years building wealth and then blow it up in 12 months because they got bored. Compounding wealth is durable. Exciting wealth tends to vanish. The third mistake is stopping too early, and it's sneaky. Someone hits 1 million and dramatically slows down their investing, assuming compounding will handle the rest. And yes, compounding does the heavy lifting now, but your contributions still matter because this phase accelerates faster than people expect. That's exactly why the second million usually comes so much faster. The machine is bigger, the assets are stronger, the habits are already wired in, and your financial mistakes have gotten smaller. Put all of that together and you get serious momentum. And momentum in wealth building is incredibly powerful. Think about pushing a car. At the start, it feels brutal, almost impossible, every inch exhausting. But once it's rolling, keeping it moving is easy. And that's exactly how this works. The first million is pushing the car uphill. The second million is the car finally rolling downhill. And that's why people at this level become obsessed with protecting momentum. They protect their health, their habits, their investments, their relationships, their time, because they understand something most people miss. Wealth is far easier to maintain than to rebuild, and rebuilding is painful. Then comes another shift most people never plan for: legacy. Most of us spend the early years just trying to survive, then trying to stabilize, then trying to grow. But once serious wealth is built, people start thinking beyond themselves: their kids, their family, their community, charitable giving, estate planning, opportunities that outlast them, and that changes what money even feels like. It stops being purely personal and becomes something that can outlive you. And for a lot of people, that ends up far more fulfilling than buying things ever was, because eventually buying more stuff gets boring. Buying freedom for your family? That doesn't. And here's the final truth about $1 million, the one most people don't get until they're standing there. They think they're chasing luxury. They think they're chasing status, the expensive cars and the massive houses and some fantasy version of rich. But watch how real wealth actually behaves, and that's almost never what matters most. What people actually want is control. Control over their time, control over their schedule, control over who and what they let into their life. And most of all, control over whether money gets to make their decisions for them. That's what wealth really buys. It's why someone with a modest lifestyle and $1 million portfolio can feel dramatically richer than someone earning huge money while drowning in obligations. Because freedom feels richer than appearances. And once people taste that, their priorities change for good. They stop trying to impress strangers. They stop chasing luxury trends. They stop caring about status symbols because they finally see the thing that matters. Every major recurring expense quietly steals future freedom. Every oversized mortgage, every luxury car payment, every ego purchase, every unnecessary upgrade, all of it steals optionality. And optionality is one of the most valuable things wealth ever gives you because it lets you pivot, change careers, start a business, take a sabbatical, travel, care for aging parents, move somewhere better, protect your health, and actually enjoy your life. That's why people at this stage get calmer. Not because life becomes perfect. Life still happens. Markets still crash, businesses still fail, health problems still come. But they tend to survive all of it far better because they built margin, and margin changes everything. Eventually, money itself stops feeling like entertainment and starts feeling like a tool. A tool for protection, for opportunity, for generosity, for peace. And ironically, that mindset tends to make people even wealthier. Because once money stops being emotional, you make better decisions. You stop panic selling. You stop revenge spending. You stop chasing trends. You stop trying to prove anything to anyone. And your portfolio just keeps quietly growing. Then one day you look back and realize how the whole thing actually went. The first 10,000 felt impossible. The first 20,000 gave you stability. The first 100,000 gave you confidence. 300,000 built your momentum. 500,000 created unfair advantages. And a million? That's where your money starts feeling automatic. That's where the machine becomes real. That's where your wealth starts working while you focus on living. And note, that doesn't mean you stop working forever. For most people, it just means you finally get to work on your own terms. And that might be the biggest luxury of all. Not retiring early, not buying flashy things, just waking up knowing you don't have to do things you hate forever. That's real wealth. And here's the part that should genuinely encourage you. Most people are far closer to that life than they realize. As long as they stop chasing shortcuts and simply stay in the game long enough for compounding to become impossible to ignore. That's how wealth quietly turns automatic. And once your money starts working without constantly needing you, you stop chasing survival and start building a life you actually want. Drop it in the comments. And if this changed how you think about the climb, subscribe, because on this channel we break down the psychology and the math behind real financial freedom. Thanks for watching. I'm Finn, and I'll see you in the next one.